The Durutti Column are an English post-punk band formed in 1978 in Manchester, England. The band is a project of guitarist and occasional pianist Vini Reilly, who is often accompanied by Bruce Mitchell on drums and Keir Stewart on bass, keyboards and harmonica. History. Early lineups. In 1978 Tony Wilson and Alan Erasmus, later partners in Factory Records, assembled a band around the remnants of local punk rock band Fast Breeder, drummer Chris Joyce and guitarist Dave Robotham. It is incorrectly thought that the name was only derived from a misspelling of the Durutti Column, an anarchist military unit in the Spanish Civil War, named after Buenaventura Durruti. The name was also taken from a 4-page comic strip entitled The Return of the Durutti Column by Andrew Copyright Bertrand, which was handed out amidst student protests in October 1966 at Strasbourg University. On January 25, Vini Reilly, former guitarist for local punk rock band Ed Banger and the Nosebleeds, joined, followed some weeks later by co-member vocalist Phil Rainford and, by the end of February, bassist Tony Bowers arrived from Alberto Y. Los Trios Paranoias. The lineup was short-lived as Rainford was sacked in July, and replaced by actor Colin Sharp, who also became one of the songwriters. Rainford went on to produce for Nico and Sons of Arca. The Durutti Column played at the Factory Club, and cut 2 numbers for the first Factory Records release, A Factory Sample, a double 7" compilation also featuring Joy Division, John Dowie and Cabaret Voltaire. On the eve of recording a debut album, the band broke up after a dispute about Wilson and Erasmus's choice of producer, Martin Hannett. Robotham, Bowers and Joyce went on to form the Mothman, Sharp went on to form the Roaring Eighties, SF Jive, and Glow, and also dedicated himself to acting. Only Reilly remained. With everyone's departure, the Durutti Column defaulted to Reilly's solo project. Other musicians contributed to recordings and live performances as occasioned. Former Alberto Y. Los Trios Paranoias drummer Bruce Mitchell doubled as co-manager with Wilson throughout their career on Factory and for many years afterwards. 1979 1990, Factory Records The first album, 1980's The Return of the Durutti Column, was produced by Martin Hannett. Reilly. He more or less got sounds for me that no one else could understand that I wanted. And he understood that I wanted to play the electric guitar, but I didn't want this horrible distorted, usual electric guitar sound, and he managed to get that. The record featured a sandpaper sleeve. I didn't even know it was going to be an album. It was just the case of jumping at the chance of being in the studio. I actually didn't get up in time. Martin had to physically get me out of bed to get me to the studio. That's how little I believed it would happen. I was still doing late-night petrol station shifts. I was even more amazed when Tony presented me with a white label. I was completely baffled. What, this is really going to be an album? You must be insane. No one's going to buy this. And then Tony got the idea from the Situationists about the sandpaper book, and decided to do some with a sandpaper sleeve. It was Joy Division that stuck the sandpaper onto the card. I was mortified. The music was unlike anything else performed by post-punk acts at the time. Reilly rooting himself in new wave with an attempt at experimental things. The record contained 9 gentle guitar instrumentals including elements from jazz, folk, classical music and rock. Reilly. I had a lot of classical training when I was young, guitar and formal training. The scales I write with and the techniques I use are classical techniques and scales. A lot of minor melodic and minor harmonic scales, which generally aren't used in pop music. Usually it's pentatonic. Hannett's production included adding electronic rhythm and other effects, including Birdsong on Sketch for Summer. The album was accompanied by a flexi-disc with 2 tracks by Hannett alone. LC, released in 1981, was recorded without Hannett, and introduced percussionist Bruce Mitchell, Reilly's most frequent musical partner and occasional manager. It was recorded on a 4-track cassette deck at home. Among the first crisp, professionally released recordings made cheaply at home. The EP Do Triangles, released in 1982, contained 3 instrumentals, with piano emphasized over guitar. Another setting was again Reilly and Mitchell. In 1984 the band was expanded to include Richard Henry, Morna Fleming, Blaine Reininger, Mervyn Fletcher, Caroline Lavelle, and Tim Kellett. The album Without Mercy, arranged by John Metcalfe, was intended as an instrumental evocation of the poem La Belle Dame sans Merci by John Keats. Say What You Mean was a departure from roots with the addition of deep electronic percussion. Kellett and Metcalfe remained. They also appear alongside Reilly and Mitchell on Circuses and Bread and Domo Arigato. The latter is a live album recorded in Tokyo and the first pop album released in the UK solely on the relatively new compact disc format. Kellett left to join Simply Red, but guested on the Guitar and Other Machines, the first new UK album to be released on the unsuccessful digital audio tape format. The Guitar and Other Machines has a far more direct sound than earlier records, with guest vocals from Stanton Miranda and Reilly's then-partner, Paul, and the use of a sequencer and drum machine in addition to Mitchell's drumming. The album was produced by Stephen Street, who also produced Morris's solo album, Viva Hate, on which Reilly played guitar. Vini Reilly, also produced by Reilly and Street, features extensive use of sampling, with loop samples of vocalists used as the basis for several tracks. Initial copies came with a 7 inches or CD single, I Know Very Well How I Got My Note Wrong, credited to Vincent Gerard and Stephen Patrick, in which a take of the Morrissey B-side I Know Very Well How I Got My Name dissolves into laughter after Reilly hits a wrong note. On Obey the Time Mitchell played on only one track, the album being otherwise a solo recording by Reilly, heavily influenced by contemporary dance music. The album's title is a phrase uttered by the titular character of William Shakespeare's Othello toward his fiancée, Desdemona in Act 1, Scene 2, I have but an hour of love, of worldly matters and direction, to spend with thee, we must obey the time. An accompanying single, the Together Mix, featured 2 reworkings of album tracks by Together, Jonathan Donafhy and Suddy Ravel. This was to be the last Durutti Column record released by Factory, in early 1991. 1990 onwards, after Factory for the first few years after the demise of Factory, the only Durutti Column album releases were Lips That Would Kiss, and Drying Red Shoes, Italian collections of alternate versions and unreleased outtakes. Former member Dave Robotham was killed by an unknown assailant in 1991. He was later memorialized by the Happy Mondays in the song Cowboy Dave. In 1993 Tony Wilson attempted to revive Factory Records, and Sex and Death was the first release on Factory 2. The album was once again produced by Stephen Street, with Mitchell and Metcalfe, and it included, on the track The Next Time, Peter Hook of New Order. Time Was Gigantic. When We Were Kids, which followed in 1998, was produced by Keir Stewart, who also played on the album and has frequently worked with Reilly since. Fidelity was released between these albums in 1996 by Les Disques du Gras copyright Pascule and was produced by Laurie Laptop. The 8 albums recorded for Factory were re-released with additional material by Factory 2 London, under the banner Factory Once, between 1996 and 1998. In 1998, Durutti Column contributed its Your Life Baby to the AIDS benefit compilation album Onda Sonora, Red Hot plus Lisbon produced by the Red Hot organization. Factory 2 effectively ended in 1998, and subsequent Durutti Column albums have been on independent labels Artful Records or Cookie Disc. Cookie Disc has also released 2 further volumes of the sporadic recordings, remastered versions of 2 very scarce LPs from the early 1980s, and 2 subscription club discs of rare and unreleased material. A download-only release, Heaven Sent, first appeared in 2005 via Wilson's Project F4, which was marketed as the 4th version of Factory Records. On September 7, 2009, Colin Sharp died from a brain hemorrhage. Audience. In the end, I don't know if it's good music or bad music or indifferent music. I have no idea. I don't really care too much, it's done with and over with. People would say, why do you release it anyway, if you don't really rate it? The answer is, whatever music it is, bad, good, indifferent, stupid, boring, whatever, it's truthful. At the time, it's the truth, and it's honest. There's no attempt to portray an image or a career or anything. It's what it is. And truth can be painful. It's about losses close to me, and about my own depression, but it's cathartic. But you have to be truthful. If you're not true in what you do, if you're creative, then you should forget it. All I've ever tried to do is be truthful. A film 24-hour party people shows Vini Reilly playing to an empty horse section Nyenda. On the commentary track, however, Tony Wilson makes it clear that this is a bit unfair, because Vini had a real audience. You can take him to Portugal and you get 2,000 people, you can take him to Paris and you get 800 people, and in Manchester you get 500 or 600. Discography, chart placings shown are from the UK Indie Chart. Primary recordings The Return of the Durutti Column, a original LP sleeve made of sandpaper, a 1996 CD issue, has same track listing and running order as the original sandpaper sleeve B1 and later black sleeve B3 vinyl pressings, Lips That Would Kiss EP, LC, Dead Triangles EP, Another Setting, Amigos M Portugal, Without Mercy, Say What You Mean What You Say EP, Circuses and Bread, No 11, The City of Our Lady with Debbie Diamond, Greetings 3 EP, The Guitar and Other Machines, Vini Reilly, a reissued in 2011. As a double CD by Cookie Disc, featuring an extra 9-track disc of previously unissued demos and sketches. Obey the Time, Sex and Death, Fidelity, Time Was Gigantic. When We Were Kids, Rebellion, Someone Else's Party, Tempus Fugit, Heaven Sent, Keep Breathing, Idiot Savants, Sunlight to Blue. Blue to Blackness, Treatise on the Steppenwolf OST, Love in the Time of Recession, A Paean to Wilson, Chronicle, Short Stories for Pauline, Chronicle XL. Secondary recordings Short Stories for Pauline. Despite being given a catalogue number at the time, this album was not released until 2013. The tracks were shared between the Lips That Would Kiss compilation and the LTM reissue of Circuses and Bread. 1983. In 2013 LTM issued the album with Liv in Bruxelles August 13, 1981 on a second CD. The Sporadic Recordings, Dry, Red Shoes, Return of the Sporadic Recordings, Sporadic 3. Live recordings Live at the Venue, Domo Arigato, One Night in New York, Live in Bruxelles August 13, 1981. Compilations Valuable Passages, the first 4 albums, Lips That Would Kiss, The Best of the Durutti Column, 4 Factory Records, The Durutti Column 2001 a 2009. References. Vinyl record label discographies a Factory catalogue numbers. External links, official website, The Durutti Column at Cirrusmatic Factory, discography, geography, discussion group at Yahoo. The official Camp Lee website, including 1968 Greasy Bear photo of Bruce Mitchell with C.P. Lee and Ian Wilson, allmusic.com article on the Durutti Column.